Hi, and welcome to the Normal Cert. Before I start and before I forget, there is this guy called Joe. Even if you find him too cool for school, if you work with a lathe, I urge you to watch this recent video of his. It will cost you 6 minutes and 10 seconds of your life, but will demonstrate rather than tell you of what could happen and bring it home for you. His warning will help create in you an instinctive no-no, even if you are frazzled, distracted, or pressurized. Please watch it. Here is what you type above. Lathe safety warning, ! For both metal and wood lathe operators. I worked in a factory when I was a kid. They processed vegetables. My first summer job was aged 8. It only lasted 3 weeks, climbing up into apple trees with a ladder, picking apples and boxing them. We were paid by the box. The next year I got a job the whole summer, serving petrol. I would check and clean the customers' windows. I would ask them if they wanted their oil and washer water checked and top up if necessary. I did well on tips plus my wages. When there was no customers, I was fixing punctures, long tire levers and a large wooden mallet to get at the inner tubes, and soapy water. I also topped up batteries with electrolyte. The distilled water came in a very large, thick glass spherical bottle in a two-handed wickerwork basket with a bed of straw. I liked that job. The owner and other grease monkeys could work on engines and would lend me a hand if I took on something that was too big for me. I got hassled by the owner only once. I was giving every customer their due number of Green Shield stamps. He was pretty pissed off. He told me to only give stamps to customers if they asked for them. I didn't accept this. They were entitled to them. Why should they have to beg for them? He was a nice guy. Most so-called adults would say, "Do what I tell you to, and don't argue with me. You're just a kid," or some such. This guy explained that the Green Shield company charged a small fortune for a book of stamps, so if I was giving them to people who didn't collect them, it was like him buying them just to be thrown away. I compromised by asking people if they collected the stamps. The following year, aged 10, he had a young apprentice, so I wasn't needed. I got a job with a wealthy landowner, piecework. There were long rows of soft soil and peat laid out. You would kneel on a board, put down a yardstick 1 inch wide against the previous row, punch your finger into the soil at each inch mark, gently pick off seedlings from a box of baby celery plants without damaging the roots, and place one in each hole, closing in each hole with your fingers. Celery was a fairly exotic plant at that time. I don't think I had ever tasted it. We got paid 2D per row. There was 12D in a shilling and 20 shillings in a pound. It was good money for a 10-year-old. When they grew bigger, they would be replanted again. When that work ended, some of us were asked if we wanted a job picking potatoes. I don't remember the rate, 1 shilling and something per sack, a big sack. 4 or 5 of us turned up for work the following day. We were asked to follow along the furrows left by a harvester, which had already harvested a quarter of the field. There were other fields to be done after that. This was not what we expected. We thought we would get plenty of spuds. The landowner told us we were to pick the small potatoes which the machine could not handle. After a full day getting about one tiny thing every 3 or 4 yards of picking through the mud with our hands, we ended up at the end of the day with about 1/6 of a sack each. We all felt swindled. Very tired and very low, we pulled up some plants and filled our sacks about half full, which was fun, and went back to the storehouse, weighed our sacks and wrote the amount in a book as instructed. There was no one else there. The following morning we all went back to quit and get paid for what we had done. He sent us packing, told us he was going to have to pay a man to sort out those spuds, and we were getting nothing. We were all to get off his land and never come back. He was a rotten old bugger. In those days, bugger and queer were the words you used for people you didn't like, and we had no idea there was any other meaning for those words. I was at a loose end. If I wanted pocket money, I had to earn it. I was told to go up to the local food factory, ask to see a particular man, and ask him if there was a chance of a job. I went up to see him and asked was there any work I could do. He said no. If there were 30 of me, he could give me a job, but just me on my own would be of little use. The factory ran a pea and bean campaign during the summer. The local farmers grew peas and string beans under contract. Each field was planted on consecutive days, then monitored for size, sweetness, moisture content, etc., until they perfectly met the correct spec. 24 hours more in the field and they were waste. When harvested into aluminium trailered lorries, they had 4 hours before the crop was frozen or dried, or it was rejected and went for silage. The produce wasn't packaged in this factory. It was bulk processing. It could end up as Bird's Eye or whoever, and it was imperative to maintain the quality and consistency. This year, it was a good warm summer. The factory had a fairly modest permanent staff. During the rest of the year, they may be drying imported sun-dried carrots, peas, or the like in hand dryers to a specific moisture content for bovril or soups, or freeze-drying some of their harvested vegetables. But during the campaign it was all hands on deck. University students and teachers got summer jobs, but this year a lot of them decided to leave en masse after the pea campaign was over. They had made enough money and were off on a foreign holiday to spend some of it before going back to school or college. The bean campaign was in trouble. Each class in each of the towns I had lived in had either 52 or 53 kids, and I arrived up at the factory with about 40 of my classmates, all willing to work. We were kitted out with the smaller sizes of women's coats with sleeves rolled up. The standard uniform for food factories was white cotton overalls, white wellies, and a white cotton hat with a peak. The women's hats had what looked like a hanky sewn to it, and I think there was a string around the end where your hair could be tied in. None of the mop heads that are worn nowadays. Standard issue was 2 outfits, one being laundered while you wore the other. A lot of the guys got inspection jobs on the conveyor lines, picking off the rejects. I was kind of king of the heap that year and got to do a variety of tasks. I learned to drive a forklift that year. The harvest was saved. Primary schools returned after the summer holidays, then secondary schools, and then university. I think arrangements were made that we didn't have to return until the campaign was finished. The town had a huge cold storage facility where the frozen produce was stored, plus a lot of Europe's butter mountain, which was eventually sold cheap to Russia so as not to reduce the European price. I worked in that factory again when I was 15 or 16 and when I was 17. That year as a kid was the last year the peas were removed from the pods in the factory. After that, the harvesters did it in the fields. I never saw the factory process, but was later told about it. There was a wide inclining conveyor belt which operators would lay the pods on. This met with another belt further up. These 2 belts would draw the pods between them, squeezing them until they popped, and taking the pods away, the peas would roll back down the incline and fall from the front end of the lower belt into water flowing at right angles to it, and were taken away. Back on another belt, and then into a scarifier. I was told one day an operator's fingers went in between the 2 belts. Quickly he pulled off his hat, rolled it into a ball, and shoved it between the belts, forcing the rollers apart enough to be able to pull back his hand and save his arm. A lathe runs a whole lot faster than these belts did, so please watch Joe's video. In the first part of this build, I talked about reducing backlash by using 2 ball nuts on each ball screw, where the balls can be put in compression or tension as desired, using 2 different arrangements against the threads of the screws. This should be quite effective, and with the envisaged use of this little machine, perfectly adequate. This will, however, introduce additional loading and wear on the transmission parts, and at intervals, measured backlash will need to be checked and either mechanically adjusted back to the initial values set, or backlash compensation will have to be altered in the controller. From what I remember, I ended part 1 with a view of a tool height block and began this video with one. The idea there is to show that when 2 pieces of metal come into contact with each other, at that point they will conduct. If we are talking of low voltages, contact and conduction are one and the same position. Anti-bounce can be easily handled. So let's take a different approach to making a super high precision, super accurate machine, eliminating the need for wear checking and correction. It's time to build a better mousetrap. Not with this machine, which I will likely become dependent on soon after conversion is complete. If not, for pig iron, I may convert it again, not to prove a concept, at least not to me, but as they say, the proof of the pudding is in the eating.
That was inedible muck, and there wasn't enough of it. Blech. I say, how dare you belch in front of my wife? Sorry, old man, I didn't realize it was her turn.
With my routers, with a single ball nut on each screw, when driving an axis in the opposite direction to the last motion at even a moderate speed, a clunk is clearly audible in the ball nuts when the balls encounter the load. It's like the man pissing on the Camel cigarette packet. Once you are aware of him, he is always there. So the big idea is to take advantage of the backlash, increase it to 2, 3, 5 millimeters, whatever. The carriage to be moved, say the saddle, cross-slide, or whatever, will have an internal dimension larger than the element moved by the transmission by whatever slop. It will also be fitted with an electromechanical locking mechanism. The transmission method can be toothed belting, rack and pinion, ball screw, or whatever you like. All we need is smooth, controllable, non-jerky travel. We are not interested in its inherent backlash. Worm gears will be okay also if you wish to use them. The moving element, which will be shorter than the internal walls of the carriage to be moved, will push it in the desired direction. The contacting surfaces of the pushing and the surfaces being pushed will be electrically isolated, forming a switch contact at each end, one for plus and one for minus direction. With the slop, only one of these contacts can be closed at a time. If neither is closed, NOR logic, NOR logic, locks the carriage. It doesn't even require a controller output to do this. If the state of the direction signal differs from the contact that should be made, the pulses for the required motion are paused until it has made contact again. The required pulses to bring the moving element into position can be supplied either externally from, say, a microcontroller with OR logic. If the controller's PLC can do this additional function, that's okay too. So the moving element supported on runners within or external to the carriage it wishes to move shimmies in the correct direction, and when they kiss, it pushes it the correct number of steps, creating the desired interpolation with the other axis being moved. That's axis as in AXES for plural of axis. If you have built a gadget using this approach, or know of a high-end machine using it, I am sure some of us may appreciate a comment below. Thank you. As already stated, I started by showing a Z-height measuring tool for the router. I have 3 of these, 1 for each router. I bought these routers rather than build them. I would not have had the time then. I have a 4th Z-height block, which is the first item I made on the first router I got. When one becomes dependent on a new tool or machine, and a job and deadline is dependent on it functioning, a contingency may be necessary. All of them spit water for lube. The smallest is used mainly for plastics, which is close at hand. Cutting plastics needs more minding, as it can clog and melt. The others are mainly for non-ferrous metals and need little minding these days. The first Z-height block I made is about 29 millimeters tall with 3 contacts, 120 degrees between them. The contacts are kept closed by a 30 mm diameter compression spring made of circa 0.5 millimeter diameter wire. Like a 3-legged stool, and gravity keeps all 3 legs on the ground. The spring pushes up, keeping all 3 contacts closed. Any force from the spindle stool on anywhere on its plunger will open one or more of these contacts, and the controls know it is at the height of the work, and the Z-block's height is set with a parameter. This tool was accurate, but a little taller than I wished. As it had 3 contacts wired in series, one of the wires had to go from a fixed body contact to the internal moving part. Fiddly, although it did not give trouble in the couple of years that I used it. When I got the 2 other machines, I went for 4 contacts for these. This is like a 4-legged restaurant table where a sachet of sugar or 2 has to be slipped under a leg to stop the wobble. I was expecting problems and was prepared for them. The frame half of each of the sets of contacts was a plated ferrous countersunk screw. This allowed each individual contact to be adjustable. The feed and return wires for the circuit went to 2 of these. The other 2 screws are bridged together. The internal moving polycarbonate plate has 4 blind holes where 4 4mm diameter by 1.5mm thick neodymium magnets are pushed in. An interference fit with a bridge wire between each pair. So the circuit is wire into screw, screw to magnet, magnet bridge to magnet, magnet to screw, screw bridge to screw, screw to magnet, magnet bridge to magnet, magnet to screw, and screw out. A plunger pushes on the moving part with the magnets. After setting these with a screwdriver and an ohmmeter 5 or 6 years ago, none of them has given any trouble or needed to be adjusted. Maybe using magnets as opposed to a spring makes it impervious to warpage. In the first part of this build, I mentioned Adam Savage and the iGress project. Years ago, I would come home from whatever I was doing, half-starved. I would cook myself something to eat. I would sit down on a hard kitchen chair, switch on the goggle box and eat. The telly would remind me to eat slowly so as not to end up with indigestion. I would use a hard, upright chair. After the trough and coffee was all gone, I would remain there for some time, too tired to get up, or suckered by the teasers to keep you watching till the end of a program, which usually resulted in disappointment and a feeling that your time was wasted. We do have comfortable chairs, but I am not comfortable using them and never do. They suck the energy out of people and turn it to blubber. We had the Discovery Channel on the telly, and I was watching an episode of Mythbusters, and I felt after watching it that I wanted to contact them. There have been very few times I had these strong feelings. Of course, as usual, I just got on with my life. It was most likely a repeat anyway. The myth was about an Irish drunk, you know the type, staggering home at 1 or 2 in the morning after 8 or 10 scoops and as many chasers, singing rebel songs at the top of his voice, hardly able to walk, giving out about the lousy government. They tax you once in your pay and they tax you again every time you buy something, and then the duty, don't get me started on that, if you only knew. Woken babies are heard crying from upstairs windows, lights go on. Someone opens a window and shouts down at the drunk. "Shut the fuck up. People have to get up for work in the morning." More lights go on. He does his Cassius Clay pose, but ready to run if needs be. "Last time I checked, this was a free country. You shut up." Forearms upright, bent at the elbow and waving backwards and forwards, he scampers off as soon as the man moves from the window. These guys may see a phone box on the way and wake you from a deep sleep. "Oh, sorry, I didn't realize it was this late. Sorry about that. I was talking with this lad in the pub and your name came up. Do you remember that time you gave me a lift back from Galway? It was somewhere between 82 and 84. Yeah, you do. We stopped at a chipper halfway. We both had a burger and chips. You got me a batter burger too. I remember. Thanks a lot." "No, anyway, it doesn't matter." "Well, there was a pretty little cottage across the road from the chipper. I was telling this lad, I can't remember whether the window frames were grey or green." "Oh, that's okay then. Yeah, I thought you would know. Sorry, I didn't know it was that late." You could feel the spit and slobber coming down the phone. "Well, I suppose it's not important, really. Just thought you'd remember. By the way, would you fancy going out for a few scoops tomorrow? This lad told me where he's kipping. I could bring him along. Only we are both short of the readies. You know how it is." "Oh, that's okay. What about the two of us? We could catch up on old times. Have a good old piss-up." "No, sorry for disturbing you." "Okay, then." He hangs up the phone. 5p wasted. He checks to see if he has the price of a religious card and his pencil with the rubber to alter the price on the back. He could hit one of the religious for the price of a bottle of Valpolicella or a flagon of triple vintage cider in the morning. He must be off form. No point in trying the phone again tonight. Best be off to the scratcher before he starts to sober up. Now his counterpart in the States is crossing the rail tracks. It's a wet night. The soles of his shoes have great big holes in them, and the cardboard he put in them is soggy wet, as are the sweaty socks which haven't been off since the last time they were soaked. He is crossing the tracks with the electrified rail. He needs to get rid of the skinful and pisses vindaloo all over the live rail. The myth says that the electricity travelled back up the flow of urine and killed him. Let's assume that the charge didn't contract the muscles in his urinary tract, cutting the supply of conductive fluid. The Mythbusters team used some type of electrolyte rather than vindaloo. Très français. Oui, oui. That's okay. I can't recall if they used a balloon or a bucket as the bladder for their dummy. They had a high-speed camera to view the fluid stream and concluded that as it falls, it breaks into droplets before it hits the rail, disallowing a circuit. The human penis and probably other animals have evolved with rifling to prevent the flow from breaking up and to help their aim. I did not feel that this myth was handled very well by the program. If anyone out there has a high-speed camera, I would be curious to know their findings and if any bugs, viruses or bacteria can outpace a flowing stream. In conclusion, I do not recommend inebriation as a career. It's a hard life. Maybe the drink companies could fund classes where drinkers could be advised of the futility of contacting sober people when they are drunk and filled with Dutch courage. At the beginning of part 1 of this build, I was altering G-code with find and paste or find and replace. I would like to explain what and why I was doing this. Also explained some of the peculiarities with these router machines and how I work around them. I think embedded somewhere in my head are the phrases, "A bad worker blames his tools, and there is no such word as can't." I like problems with equipment because it is so much harder to find a solution when not presented with a problem. One of the burning issues I would like to cover during this build is 6T RAM as used in embedded control. Many people seem to be experiencing problems and erratic behavior with microcontrollers in electrically noisy environments, and I would like to cover my problems and solutions in this field. I am sure anyone who has had similar problems would be fascinated if I can properly communicate my experiences. I am also aware that many people have little knowledge of such devices, and this topic would bore the pants off them. They could skip that part, daydream through it, or take them off. When this build is done, I may film building a cat house. I know a couple of cats who would like one. I may just pack in this videoing thing. It is an awful lot of work, but at the moment I am finding it challenging in an odd kind of way. I wouldn't mind sharing some of my odd insights on some of the things I have been curious about. For example, every number of years I have taken an interest in very tiny simple machines, the smallest I know being the hydrogen atom, and how these little machines share energy with those who have less, creating a sustainable universe. How these little gadgets produce the phenomenon we understand as gravity. My current understanding, though I would have to check, it's a while since I looked at this stuff, is that if you were small enough to be standing on the proton in the center of a hydrogen atom, as you now stand on the Earth, and you looked out at the electron spinning around it as if it were the moon, if you were to call one revolution of the proton a day, then the electron would take circa 14.49 days to make one revolution. That's about twice the speed of our moon around our Earth. Curiouser and curiouser, says Alice. It can be so hard sometimes to see or be aware of a bigger picture when you live on a planet where tasks and processes are divided into subsets. Individuals are employed with a single function or role to perform. A world filled with subhumans who believe this man-made, free-falling existence is all there is or could be, while it is riddled with hyenas and parasites who endeavour to maintain a status quo that serves their own ends. I would also like to talk about alternative ways of obtaining energy, ideas for new products some of you guys may be interested in building, some more bull with a few funnies thrown in. In part 3, I should have the lathe spindle encoder fitted and a new mechanism on the chuck to allow me to reverse it. This lathe has a 1.5 inch by 8 TPI spindle screw, which was not intended to allow the chuck to run in reverse. If you are interested, there is a guy on YouTube called Robert Sapolsky, Sapolsky. Very interesting and entertaining. A good place to start with him is Digit 1. Introduction to Human Behavioral Biology. That's a series of 7 recorded lectures, or buckets as he calls them, from Stanford University, each about 1.5 hours long. Thanks for watching. Subscribe if you don't mind me getting a guilt trip if I pack it in. Joke, joke. Bye.